Well, a very good morning. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company here on Talk. I'm here between now and midday today. Slightly shorter programme because of the football. But listen, thank you so much for tuning in. I want to get your voice on the air within the next couple of hours because there's so much to talk about. Rachel Reeves is in China. Is that going to mean that we get a huge amount of investment? Are we going to get the Chinese investing, getting the growth in the UK economy? I wonder. But the story I'm most interested in this morning is Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. He says that grooming gang rhetoric risks inciting mass violence. He's given an interview to who else? The Guardian, saying that there are people in my community who have either Pakistani heritage or look different who are now more fearful today than they were before. He says he has no difficulty or qualms calling out sickening crimes of sexual abuse gangs, criticising well-meaning but fundamentally misguided and warped views of political correctness. Well, what do you make of what he has to say? I want to bring the focus back not just on politics, but also on the victims of this, the people who are, to this day, being raped, the children at the heart of this. And that's why we're going to talk to Jim Gamble in a second. You're definitely going to want to hear what he says. He's the former head of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command Centre within the National Crime Agency. So we'll talk about things that have been achieved, things that haven't been achieved, because there's so much more work to do. We've got on the debate desk today, Jo Wheeler, by popular demand. Jo has been on talking about the weather at numerous points, but there are many, many other tools in her armoury, and she will be giving her political views, commentating on the news of the day. So Jo Wheeler's coming up in about 20 minutes time alongside Maxwell, Marlowe, who's another political commentator. They'll be on the debate desk this morning. We'll also talk about Number 10 plots billions in disability welfare cuts to ease the debt crisis. We know that debt is so expensive. Also, there's only a week of gas supply left, so we will be talking about Ed Miliband and the eco-Marxists, as some people call them. Also, what does an unconditional discharge actually mean? Donald Trump in 9 days' time will become president of the United States again. How is that all going to work out, and what does it mean, crucially, for the United Kingdom as well? Loads to discuss. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Tommy's on the phones today. You give him a ring, you make your point. We'll get as many people on air between now and 12 o'clock. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at TalkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Let's get started here on Talk. Well, Wes Streeting has given an interview today. He says he's been among those at the forefront of the government's response to Elon Musk. It was, of course, Elon Musk's many tweets, over hundreds of tweets, literally over 200 tweets on British politics in the last sort of 10 days or so, that has meant that people are talking again about this story. I think quite a number of media outlets have dropped the ball on this and are talking about it simply through politics. And listen, I'm a political specialist, as most people know. I talk about politics almost every day of the week. It's what's fascinated me since I was a young boy. But what we need to remember in all of this is not just a political row. It's about the people, the women, the children at the centre of this. And that's why I want to talk to Faye Maxted, who's Chief Executive of the Survivors Trust. But first, I want to talk to Jim Gamble, who's a child safeguarding specialist. And there's a lot of questions around, I think, how the police deal with this, how they have dealt with this, what the National Crime Agency has done or not done. But Jim has dedicated his professional life to this as the former head of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command Centre within the National Crime Agency. Jim, I'm sure you don't want to get involved in the political row, and I'm not asking you to do so, but what do you make of the debate in the last sort of 10 days or so? How informed has it been? Because we have a load of viewers and listeners who are really, really worried about this, who think it's a huge problem, who want politicians to deal with it. Some people calling for a national inquiry, some people saying local inquiries are a better thing, or alternatively, in some people's view, just for the police to do their job. What is your take on the last 10 days or so, Jim?
Well, I think it's been really interesting, and whilst I don't agree with the way in which, or the language, in fact, that Elon Musk has used, and I think it's for others to decide, but some of it, to me, if it was coming from a citizen within this country, would in fact be considered potentially criminal. But it has highlighted the issue, and it has accelerated a contemporary debate within it. And of course, as you've already said, different sides of the political spectrum have weaponized it. That said, I have some sympathy with what Wes Streeting is saying. I think we need to be careful that what we're going to do here is target the criminal activity, not target particular communities. And if you look at group-based offending, the vast majority of that statistically is going to come from groups of white men predominantly. So there are trends and themes and patterns, and we can't ignore them. But the principal trend or theme that you need to consider is that victims are always going to be coercively controlled. Their vulnerability is going to be enhanced. The abnormal is going to be normalized to the point whereby they no longer recognize that they're victims. And that creates a difficulty. And from the perpetrator's point of view, they minimize, they self-justify, and they blame others. So they will use and abuse anything, whether it's their own perverted view of a cultural belief that says, well, this is okay because this is a lesser person. That's classic minimization, and it's something that cannot be ignored. But it happens across the board in all types of communities. And when you talk about gangs, I mean, young people are being sexually exploited by criminal gangs across the UK, and I include Northern Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, that's not going to be from Pakistani, British Pakistani men. That's going to be from those who operate in environments, within the criminal fraternity where they're able to apply coercive control without actually trying, because some young people are so vulnerable they'll feel safer under their wing.
Tell us a bit about that, actually. Just drill down a little bit to that, Jim, because I'm fascinated when you say people, I've written down your words here, no longer recognise they are victims. How can someone how can a child get to that? They're emotionally manipulated, they're obviously physically manipulated as well, but the emotional, psychological manipulation, just tell us a little bit about how the gangs work in that regard, because I find that both horrifying and fascinating, and I think a lot of people watching and listening will wonder about that, and I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I'm happy to do that. What I say, you've got someone coming on to speak about survivors, and I think their words will be more credible than mine, but having spoken and worked with a number of survivors of this particular crime type. You're talking about young people who at a particular time in their life feel alienated or isolated, perhaps from family, perhaps from friends. And the greatest gift that a groomer, and that's what these people do, they groom them, can provide, isn't money. It's actually friendship, making them feel that they're part of something, making feel that you're one of us. And whether that's a gang in London operating on the fringes, or directly involved in drugs and drug trafficking, or county lines moving drugs across the country, or a gang that are identifiable by their ethnicity, who are working together, in that type of environment, they bring you in. They make you feel special. You're now one of us. You belong. You've got the protection of the group. And as they do that, they begin to normalize abnormal behavior, of course, providing sexual favors to them. Well, that's normal. That's what we do. That's who we are. To the point where I've had victims, and survivors of this awful abuse tell me that they'd really lost track of what was right and what was wrong. And it was only in one case that I can think of, and I won't name the young person, but they wrote a really powerful book where they actually had to be removed for a significant period of time before they could look back and see how they'd been exploited. Because one of the things they told me is the person that prevented social care from engaging, that prevented the police from taking effective action at that critical moment in time, was me, because I believed that I was part of this. And that's part of the seduction and the grooming that goes on, whereby young people make it more difficult. And I'm not blaming them, because the problem is there's too much victim blaming goes on. So we've got to understand that when you're dealing with a victim, first and foremost in these cases, you've got to get beyond their reticence to engage. That may be because it's been normalized, it may be because of fear, and it may be because of fear for their family or others. So it's extremely complex, and it is ruining lives, and these young victims carry a legacy of pain. But it happens everywhere. You have this debate about how many cities is it happening in. Well, if you want to identify cities by ethnicity, then you're starting from the wrong place. How many cities are children being exploited in? And the answer to that is every city.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on whether a national inquiry is a good idea, a local inquiry, whether, I've absolutely no doubt I have not a scintilla of doubt that you, at every point in your career, Jim, have done your job. But is the police in general doing its job? Because there are a lot of people who are worried about this. You've talked about victims and police being able to do their job effectively. But is there a grip on this?
I don't think there is the type of total grip that there should be. And let me explain why. You know, you talk about CEOP and you talk about it being part of the National Crime Agency Command. Well, actually, it wasn't in my day. I resigned because CEOP was being dissolved and actually assimilated into the NCA. And I thought that was wrong, because when we first built CEOP, actually under the former Labour government, it was built to be the one place where safeguarding children was the priority, not a priority amongst many. So within the institutions that deliver safeguarding, including social care, education, health, and of course policing, there would be one place that aggregated knowledge. We had the first missing desk, and we understood that going missing, and the longer you're missing, means the greater the chance is that you're going to suffer more and more exploitation. But that was politically vandalized when we had an election and the Conservatives came in and decided, no, we're going to push this into our new flagship, the National Crime Agency. And I think that was a fundamental error, because to get this right, you need a holistic approach that begins with education. Yeah. How do we educate and empower children in safe spaces in schools? How do we educate and empower parents? How do we make sure that colleagues in health understand what to look for and what to do when they see it? And of course, there's a piece of work to be done within policing. And I myself, in reviews, have seen in recent years, there's still victim blaming. There's still a reticence to engage and challenge for fear of offending.
But and talking about that engaging and challenging, I wonder specifically, look, you know, statistically, it is a fact that the vast majority of paedophilia that happens in this country is by white men. That is true. But this particular issue is one which Pakistani Muslim gangs are absolutely a part of. It was on a mass scale. The police, the National Crime Agency, some would argue, had no inroads to those communities or intelligence. It was too difficult to penetrate the communities because of the culture, and many of the men are part of the communities that live entirely separately. I just wonder how big that a problem was and how that was tackled by you, and also how it can be tackled now.
Well, we tackled it going back to 2010, ending in 2011 when I resigned, by creating an intelligence desk to aggregate all of the information we had regarding vulnerable adolescents and how they could be pathwayed into harm, and how we could provide interdiction strategies and support to local policing. But that was deconstructed on the basis of the political vandalism of the Conservative government when they threw that to one side. So the tactical deployment that occurred since was fundamentally focused on crime. And if you put child protection and safeguarding in amongst multiple agendas that deal with drug trafficking, that deal with borders, you can guess how that prioritization is pushed down the table. No matter what anyone says, I don't accept that that does not happen. I saw it in America, you know, after you had 9/11, when the FBI's Innocent Images Unit, you know, was pulled back into counterterrorism roles. There needs to be somewhere that advocates by, for, on behalf, and with a sole focus on our children and young people. In 2010, just after the Conservative government came in, Contact Point, a database that literally millions of pounds have been spent on, so that anyone from any part of the child safeguarding system could establish where a child was and what other agencies had an interest in them, so they could come together and work collaboratively.
Okay.
That was arbitrarily abolished in the August of the year after they came into power. So there's too much politics at play. And I think on this occasion, we shouldn't default to let's have another review. A review of what? Because we review silos, and that's the way we do it. We review them in isolation. We review...
But I just wonder what you personally, just finally, Jim, what you did in CEOP and in the NCA specifically to investigate Pakistani grooming and rape gangs.
Well, you're talking about, I resigned in 2011. So personally, pre-2011, we began to identify the problem by creating teams within CEOP that were fundamentally child-centred, focusing on learning about why what happened was happening. That's why, if you look today, post all of the multiple reviews that have taken place where it's working well, you've got vulnerable adolescence groups looking at how long children are missing for, gang affiliation and gang association. because radicalization, sexualization, it is all about vulnerability, and vulnerability is extended whenever you haven't got, that good parental oversight. Okay. Those agencies fundamentally focused on what's best for you. So let me finish by saying this. There are hundreds of reports out there. We talk about the J report as if it's a silver bullet. It's not. It deals with some good stuff about registration and about redress. But actually what we need all of the key statutory agencies round table style, using an aggregated version of all of the reports to say, right, what are the practical solutions? Because where this really falls down is the speed within which criminal justice responds and the derisory sentencing on occasions. And if you look at this begins at one end with technology, ironically, given what Elon Musk is saying, where people get away for too much for too long. And even when they are caught, less, than 80% of those people caught downloading images. And this will be inextricably linked to everything we've talked about, go to prison.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there are clear problems. Jim, thank you. That's Jim Gamble there. He's a child safeguarding specialist. There are clear problems with how this is dealt with in policing to this day. I want to talk to Faye Maxted now, Chief Executive of the Survivors Trust. Faye, thank you for joining me this morning. What do you make of what Jim was saying there? Because clearly there are major issues. I mean, he's talking historically about the police, and I did want to tackle him a bit more on that. But listen, I suppose the point is that to this day, there are serious issues. And I wonder what you think, in all the noise that we've had over the last 10 days, Faye, where are victims in all of this?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on today. I think there's such a lot of good and positive in what Jim said, and I'm really heartened when I hear him talking about what we need is something that focuses solely on children. And, this is something that the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse included in their recommendations, Minister for Children and a National Child Protection Authority. The reality is that, we have lost sight of the victims in this, because the children that are sexually exploited grow into adults. They're not getting the support they need. They're not getting the justice they need. And, even worse, we aren't seeing children now being protected in the way that they need to be. So we need to do something really drastic to change things.
Well, what is that drastic action, actually? Because we talked a bit about policing. I'm not sure Jim Gamble, I mean, he was very interesting to talk to, but I'm not sure he gave us too much information about what had actually been done in regard to specifically Pakistani grooming gangs, because this is a cultural problem, it is a crime problem. There's so many different aspects to this, and I wonder if you feel, I suppose I want to ask you, Faye, what you feel the best way to get a grip of this is. Is it an inquiry? Is it just the police doing their job in a better way?
I think, like Jim said, we have had lots of inquiries, we've had lots of reports, multiple recommendations, and few of them have actually been implemented. I think that's the issue with inquiries at the moment. There is no formal process following an inquiry that monitors the implementation of the recommendations. And therefore, we're left with really valid, useful, helpful ways of changing child protection systems that aren't implemented, that aren't monitored across the country, and that's what we need.
And that is a political failure of successive governments. I mean, I've said this a number of times, but the J Review, for example, had 20 different recommendations. 18 of them were accepted by the Conservative government that did nothing in 18 months after the J Review. The Labour government has done nothing in 6 months. What do you think the most important thing to be done to protect children being raped today is, Faye?
I think we need accountability, and we need someone who is directly responsible for representing children at government level, because this is a political issue. It's a major scandal in this country. It's a huge risk for our children and young people, and we need to be really taking strong action. So we need someone at cabinet level who is responsible for representing children. We need a child protection authority.
But we do. I mean, the Education Secretary is responsible for children. Is she doing her job?
She's responsible for a lot of other things too. And I think, we need to make sure that we have a specific focus on child protection and keeping our children safe.
Okay. Faye, how has this been for the victims that you've been speaking to in the last 10 days? Are they happy that people are talking about this, that we're actually trying to tackle it, or are they being re-traumatised by the fact that this is being talked about so much? What is your experience with people, obviously at the Survivors Trust, people you have helped, in regard to the national conversation that's going on here?
I think it's a mixture of reactions, and on the one hand, it's welcomed that the whole issue is back in the news again, back in the media very strongly. On the other hand, it's distressing to look back at all the inquiries and know that the recommendations that would have made a difference haven't been implemented. And as a survivor myself, I could think that's where I'm sitting too. I would like to see some action that does protect children, that makes sure there is support in place for survivors, and that, you know, we can really look at the data and see what's happening and take action accordingly.
In as much as you want to, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Faye, but you said you're a victim yourself. Can you tell us what happened to you?
I wasn't sexually exploited by a gang or a grooming gang, but sexually abused at a very young age.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Faye, and thank you for speaking to us this morning. That's Faye Maxwell, their Chief Executive of the Survivors Trust. We also heard from Jim Gamble. We'll get the reaction of those on the debate desk. Joe Wheeler is with us, as is Maxwell, Marlowe. We'll talk to them in just a minute here on...
I didn't actually create it. My officers created it and the engineers created it.
Right.
And obviously the idea comes from overseas, Holland, where you know there's a culture of walking and cycling. And in England and locally, we need to actually make sure we handle growth sustainably. There's lots of houses being built in the country. 11,000 in Hemel Hempstead planned in the next 5 or so years, 5,000 jobs. And if we rely on the car for everyone to get there, Hemel Hempstead will be an absolute gridlock.
We need to get tough on deporting people who come to our country and then break the law. We need to get really tough, like other sensible countries do. And if the law doesn't allow us to do that, then let's change the law. And if international laws don't allow us to do that, then let's derogate from those international laws, because you don't get away with this sort of stuff in other countries. So how is it that Britain has become some...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you everybody who has been in touch, including Betty, who says, "Morning, Peter. West Reading's comments are inflammatory and clearly show this government has decided that it will side against the 95% of this country on any topic. Luckily, there's only 45,000 left in the army and 100,000 police will side with the people. This government is only interested in the 500 to 1,000 votes in their seats." Well, West Reading is under pressure in his seat. He said the grooming gang's rhetoric risks inciting massacre, streeting. That is the headline in The Guardian today, spoken to them. 528 majority in Ilford South, which is his constituency. The use of inflammatory language over grooming gangs risks vilifying entire communities and could lead to atrocities such as the mosque massacre in New Zealand that killed more than 50 people, according to the Health Secretary. Given everything we've heard so far this morning, Joe Wheeler is with us, the political and commentator, meteorologist as well, many strings to her bow, and Maxwell, Marlowe, political commentator on the debate desk this morning. I just wonder, where do you think this debate kind of is, Joe? Because I'm hearing a lot of, we can't talk about it, or we shouldn't talk about it, or alternatively, this isn't just Pakistani grooming gangs. I mean, it is Pakistani gangs. There is no doubt about that. That is factually correct. And I don't think we should be saying, it's fine to say dial down the rhetoric, or, you know, let's have a sensible conversation about this. But we are having a sensible conversation about this on this station anyway. We're talking about the huge and dreadful and ongoing thing that this is, and people are fed up because you hear about Jim Gamble talking about this happened in 2011, 2010, etc. But we're here in 2025 and this is still a massive problem.
Absolutely. I think the public want honesty and transparency to start with. When Jim was talking about the victims, he said some of them don't know that they're victims. It's coercive control, and they've not realised it. Well, tell that to the girls who went to the police station, whose parents went to the police and said, this has happened, and the police did nothing. The CP...
in other countries. So how is it that Britain has become some...
Across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you everybody who has been in touch, including Betty, who says, "Morning, Peter. West Reading's comments are inflammatory and clearly show this government has decided that it will side against the 95% of this country on any topic. Luckily, there's only 45,000 left in the army and 100,000 police will side with the people. This government is only interested in the 500 to 1,000 votes in their seats." Well, West Reading is under pressure in his seat. He said the grooming gang's rhetoric risks inciting massacre, streeting. That is the headline in The Guardian today, spoken to them. 528 majority in Ilford South, which is his constituency. The use of inflammatory language over grooming gangs risks vilifying entire communities and could lead to atrocities such as the mosque massacre in New Zealand that killed more than 50 people, according to the Health Secretary. Given everything we've heard so far this morning, Joe Wheeler is with us, the political commentator, meteorologist as well, many strings to her bow, and Maxwell, Marlowe, political commentator on the debate desk this morning. I just wonder, where do you think this debate kind of is, Joe? Because I'm hearing a lot of we can't talk about it, or we shouldn't talk about it, or alternatively, this isn't just Pakistani grooming gangs. I mean, it is Pakistani gangs. There is no doubt about that. That is factually correct. And I don't think we should be saying, it's fine to say dial down the rhetoric, or, you know, let's have a sensible conversation about this. But we are having a sensible conversation about this on this station anyway. We're talking about the huge and dreadful and ongoing thing that this is, and people are fed up because you hear about Jim Campbell talking about this happened in 2011, 2010, etc. But we're here in 2025 and this is still a massive problem.
Absolutely. I think the public want honesty and transparency to start with. When Jim was talking about the victims, he said some of them don't know that they're victims. It's coercive control, and they've not realised it. Well, tell that to the girls who went to the police station, whose parents went to the police and said, this has happened, and the police did nothing, the CPS did nothing, and they're still waiting for some kind of justice 15 years later. That is outrageous. In any society, for this to have happened is disgusting. And I think we do want another inquiry. Maxwell was saying that actually he looked at the original one and it's actually quite good, but it's not enough and we didn't see it. And
it's interesting with the Alexis J report because it only mentions Rochdale, I should say, it only actually mentions that once, and it is into sort of paedophilia, child exploitation in general, but specifically on these gangs themselves. Is a national inquiry needed, a local inquiry? I mean, what is the solution here, Maxwell?
I mean, for me, I think there's a very good inquiry. The Ilford inquiry was very good. It was in and out, very quick. The Commissioner went to houses of victims.
Do you mean Telford rather than Ilford?
Oh, sorry, to Telford, yes, the Telford inquiry, sorry. Yeah. But this is the thing, I think you can execute them quickly, but you need the political capital. And what I'm worried about is that essentially the government's guts aren't there to do it. And they still want to implement a lot of the original inquiry's recommendations. The last government didn't implement all of them. I still think there's work to be done there. However, we cannot get around the fact this is a primarily Pakistani grooming gang problem in certain communities, and we need to be very explicit about that, absolutely. However, we shouldn't, make such broad sweeping statements to say that this is all Pakistanis, this is all Muslims, whatever. I mean, speaking to some friends from those backgrounds, they are as horrified as we are. I mean, imagine the shame that it brings to those communities that there are actors going.
But what about the community leaders? Where are the community leaders in all of this? Where are the imams coming out saying, this is totally unacceptable, nobody should facilitate this, nobody should turn a blind eye, this is dreadful stuff? I mean, there does need to be community leadership here. It can't just say, isn't this awful? It has to, you've got to be a bit of leadership here, doesn't there, Joe?
So who's going to call for that? Who's going to ask the imams to come out and do that? Because if they don't believe that it's wrong, we need to know that too.
Yes.
We need to understand that. Other than that, we need somebody to convey that message, as you say, to avoid triggering language or inflammatory language. We need somebody to come out and say, this may be predominantly because of Pakistani grooming gangs, but not all Pakistanis are like that, and that's not what they do.
And nobody's suggesting that either.
No.
And there's too much to me anyway. I wonder what you think about this, Maxwell, but there's too much I'm not a racist but kind of language, or, I don't want to be racist, but I'm saying da-da-da-da. And I don't think people are being racist here. If something is a problem with a specific ethnic group, you can call that out and you can say, this is factually a thing. And we have a Wes Streeting, for example, who was, the Health Secretary, who was part of coming up with a definition around this for an all-party parliamentary group, just a group of MPs over the last a couple of years ago. And the suggestion was even to identify this with the Pakistani community was racist by itself.
Well, it happens on both sides. So that new definition also was the work of Anna Soubry, who was a Tory MP as well. So we see it on both sides of the House, and I think there is concern with politicians. Look, I can understand where Wes is coming from when he talks about political violence, and I know that a lot of MPs are very scared at the moment. Jess Phillips' interview, by the way, you know, she is getting death threats. That's certainly true. I know a lot of MPs who are getting death threats.
I don't want any MP to get a death threat.
Exactly.
I don't want Jess Phillips to get a death threat. I think, you know, we need to be responsible in what we do. But what they're going through, even with death threats, and I personally have received death threats for things I've said on this programme, and I mean, it's not nice.
Yeah. Well,
but at the same time, what the victims are going through is so much worse.
I completely agree. All I'm saying, I'm trying to explain where they are coming from when they're saying stuff like this. I do not think that there are MPs in the House who are seeing the massive fallout over this, whether that's from Elon, whether there is the thousands of emails they're getting from their constituents who are angry about this. I don't think they want to continue covering it up, to be honest. I really don't think so. I just think they're a bit lost where it comes from. And I think this idea that I'm not racist but, and adopting these definitions which are too broad, that's the real concern. So I think they need to sit down, have a real think about what they do next. Don't try and, you know, I think the Tories and Reform with their amendments to the education bill that went through, that were eventually quashed, I think we need to be having larger debates in the House about this, much larger debates, and also in the press as well, which I'm glad the press is doing.
Yeah, we are having the debate anyway. Joe?
In the paper this morning, there's a huge number of people in Britain who want another inquiry. But you say the first one was quite good. What are we going to achieve with the second one? Should we not be focusing now on the victims, the sentences that were given, or sentences to be given out for those found guilty in the future?
A lot of people say this isn't about an inquiry. This is actually just about implementing the law and the police doing their job. And there's far too many times when, you know, there have been investigations that have essentially regarded children as worthless and stupid little girls, when actually they weren't. They were telling the truth about what was happening to them.
Some of the accounts, 13-year-olds drunk a lot of alcohol with several men, and the police are saying that they gave consent, or they're just silly little drunkards.
Yeah.
How do we
you can't give consent if you're under 16. It's impossible. Yeah, it is rape, and it needs to be called what it is. And I do worry that we're, you know, I don't want a mosque massacre like the one in New Zealand. Obviously, we've got to be responsible in how we're talking. But I'm not sure Wes Streeting, I mean, does he have a point? Do you think do you think that the national debate is inflammatory around this, or people are just calling out what's there, Maxwell? What's your sense? I mean, it's hard to talk about the hundreds of thousands, millions of words that have been discussed on this in the last 10 days, but my sense of it is, and what I get from our viewers and listeners who are always talking common sense, is that actually it's just exasperation.
I wouldn't call it exasperation, actually. I'd say it's the step worse than anger. It's disgust. And I think a disgusted nation is one which is will be using inflammatory language because they want to express themselves really clearly, and they're not feeling like their representatives are doing that. So I think there is a risk that we could be looking at very inflamed community tensions. I think it's down to those communities of which are accused to step up and, you know, really call out what happened. Those communities discuss and anger with what happened and try and come together and try and form a way forward. And you're right, Peter, I'd like to see community leaders from these groups come out and suggest next steps.
Final word from Joe on this.
I think there just needs to be some kind of structure going forward. One, to look back at what happened, apologies, to be honest, for the victims, and some recognition of what they went through, because they have been ignored and swept under the carpet. And many of them, I've listened to them recently, are still suffering now, even though all this happened many, many years ago.
And some of it's ongoing now.
Absolutely. And the next thing is we make sure it never, ever happens again.
Yeah. Joe, Maxwell, thank you. We'll return to the debate desk in a second. Stay with us here on...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Steve Smedley, who has been in touch, who says Streeting is terrified of losing his seat and jumping on the far right line again. Disgraceful politicking as usual, and he'll still be booted out as the Muslim vote will only grow. This person's on, Lorraine says on Streeting, Streeting telling us to stop talking about the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs because it may incite violence highlights the level these Labour politicians will stoop to, says this person, says Lorraine, in order to protect their own seats. The level of violence and depravity that these white children are suffering is beyond comprehension, and no longer should these innocents be sacrificed on the altar of political game playing. Streeting's attitude is deplorable, but not surprising considering some appalling posts he's made about other people in the past, including Jan Moyer, Chris Woodhead and Susan Hall. Well, I'm familiar with those posts and they are certainly controversial. Another person says if people in certain communities are fearful of reprisals because of the gang rape accusations, they should stamp this filthy, vile behaviour out themselves in those communities. Jackie says, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. There's a vast difference between sexual abuse and grooming gangs, which is organised rape, and torture gangs. Victims have realised they're being abused and the police have done nothing. Thank you to Mary, who says that this is how crime detection works. You look for patterns, you deploy covert, overt and intelligent gathering methods, you start targeting and profiling. Pakistani Muslim men abusing young white girls, stop cars with Pakistani men driving around with young white girls. If they're under 16, you suspect possible grooming, start an investigation, involve parents, involve social services. Police in many places shrank back from normal policing methods, particularly profiling and targeting, because bosses were running scared of racism claims. Jim Gamble, who we spoke to a little bit earlier, has been in touch because Joe Wheeler and Maxwell Marlowe are here on the debate desk today, and Jim has been watching what Joe has said and has been in touch with us to say, shocked to hear that Joe suggests that my point regarding some victims don't know they're victims because of the grooming and coercive control alongside tell that to the girls and their parents who went to the police. I, of course, addressed this and was clear that it was some victims. So we're happy to make that clear from Jim Gamble's perspective. Joe, just a final thought on this. What do we do now? How do we go forward with this? Or perhaps you want to react to what Jim says?
I would just say to Jim, I agree with him and also with the point that I made. Some people know that they're victims and they went to the police. There are others that were kind of absorbed into the group and chose to stay with them or chose to spend time with them. And those are the ones who were coerced, didn't really realise that it was wrong. Your listener who just said you pick up Pakistani men with white girls in the back, if they're underage, then you throw everything at it to make sure that it's not ongoing. It's simple and it's straightforward and it deals with the problem, surely?
Yes, I agree with every single word you've said. There will be people who say, racial profiling, is that a good idea? I don't care if it stops the problem. I really don't care. I mean, you know, there were people who look like me, sound like me, from my background, who were stopped at airports and told, where are you going, sir, over the years. I'm happy enough with that if that stopped terrorism for 1 second in regard to Northern Ireland terrorism. Profiling, I'm very relaxed about it. Maxwell, a final word on this.
Well, the gangs were profiling, weren't they? So this is the amazing thing, is that, you know, we can't enforce the law because of wishy-washy concerns from police. I think this needs to be turned around immediately.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to continue talking about this as the show goes on. You want to get your voice on the air? You give me a ring. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. There are a number of other stories around today that I want to talk about on the debate desk here with Maxwell and Joe, but we're not going to ignore this story. We are one of the few media outlets that have not ignored this story. We've talked about it consistently since the 1st of January. It's now the 11th of January. We'll talk about it till the 31st of December if you want us to. You let us know what you want us to talk about, because this is my show, but it's your show too. You want to talk about rape gangs? We'll talk about it till the cows come home, because something needs to be done. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk about the supply of gas that is in this country, because it has been cold recently. One person who knows all about that is Joe Wheeler. He's not just a political commentator but a meteorologist as well, and has been keeping us right up to date across this station in terms of what's happening. Why is there so little gas, and what is your thought on this in terms of how we keep people warm, Joe?
Well, first and foremost, I saw the headline this morning, you know, less than a week's gas. And obviously, everybody's concerned. The cold weather, it got down to, I think, minus 19.7 last night in Altnahara, which is pretty chilly by anybody's standards.
Where's that?
Northern Scotland.
Right, okay, I thought so, yeah.
But right across the country, sub-zero, and places have got freezing fog, so temperatures won't rise above freezing during the day. And suddenly, there's a threat of only having 7 days' worth of gas, and it's like, oh no, what are we going to do? And this is on top of the pensioners who can't afford to heat their homes. So I read this story, and basically it's Centrica who would like the government to invest £2 billion into their stores off the East Coast, which shut in 2017 when the government said it was too expensive, and now they want to reopen, or sorry, they are now reopened partially, but only at a fifth of capacity. So we need that investment. Obviously, the trend is towards net zero and using sustainable power, but since we don't have that and can't do that, and to take my word for it, things are calming down with the weather, so your wind turbines aren't going to be much good to you for the next 2 weeks or so. We need something else.
Are we going too quickly towards net zero, do you think, Jo?
Absolutely. Not least of all because I have no doubt that there are new technologies being developed which are more efficient.
Never buy the prototype. Go do a few versions in and get it sorted.
Of course. So I think there may be other solutions in the future to be green and sustainable. Would be absolutely wonderful, but it's just not possible at the moment.
I think Jo has a point, don't you, Maxwell, that I don't think there are too many people who are not happy to do their bit, recycle a little bit, you know, do what needs to be done, but net zero and what Ed Miliband wants to do and the fact that, you know, there's only a week of supply left, that is all part and parcel, really, of the fact that we're moving very, very quickly to something that is fundamental change economically, environmentally, in so many different ways. Is Miliband moving too quickly?
Way too quickly. We're familiar every year, every December, with the NHS is in crisis. We're going to have exactly the same thing with our energy supplies if things do not change too quickly. I mean, let's look at why this crisis is happening currently. Yes, there's a capacity problem from Centrica and our general infrastructure. But there's also, we have exported our energy sovereignty. So part of the reason why there's a shortage, it's very cold in Texas at the moment, where we import a lot of our liquid natural gas. The fires in California, where a lot of the refining goes on, that stops a lot of production. We've also just put sanctions on Russian energy companies, and yes, I'm completely in favour of that, but there's a general supply of gas, which that is going to hold up. We're also competing with the Chinese and the Indians for that gas because they can't produce it on themselves. So we're just kind of this little player in the corner who've chosen to not do any fracking, even though we've got one of the most abundant supplies of shale in Europe, and also decided to stop issuing new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. So we are choosing completely consciously to cause this crisis continually. So we need to drill, baby, drill, to quote Donald Trump, get those fracking stations open across the Midlands and the north of England, and also to invest more in our North Sea oil.
Jo, final word on this?
Quite simply, basically what Maxwell
what he said.
It's what he said. Sorry, he did say he was going to ask me about the cold over central parts of America.
What is going on with that, Jo?
Yeah, well, that was a bit of a polar spill. So there's a vortex which keeps all the polar air in the far north, and it spilled down into those central parts of America. So
there we go.
That's where the cold came from. But I mean, we do need we need to create our own fuel. We need to have our own resources. How come China is opening power stations, coal-fired power stations?
All the time, and getting ahead of us economically.
Yeah,
Rachel Reeves is there at the moment.
And we're trying to buy it in.
Yeah.
It's just stupid. We have these resources, we have these facilities, we're just not using them.
Jo and Maxwell will be back in a second. Let me just read a couple of messages here. Leslie has been in touch and said, is Wes Streeting advocating shutting down the debate on grooming? That's how these girls were let down by the likes of Streeting, not wanting to face facts. Also, one of the long-standing issues in our society, says Dawn in Chelmsford, is that police, social services, education, probation, etc. always talk about interagency working. The reality is that they work in silos and victims fall through the gaps. Dawn, I have seen in government, when I worked in government for 3.5 years, how often different bits of government, different bits of the state don't work together. They have their own agendas. They often don't do that in lots of different ways, not just in that particular area. Also, Benny in Belfast has been in touch, has a bit of a policing bent with this one. Such investigations into grooming gangs were too hard for police. They took up too many resources, and the institutional misogyny of the police meant these children were regarded as worthless. Councils also shied away from robust social services action because their fear of being accused of racism. Resources also stretched. We have gross institutional failure, laziness and complicity on a grand scale. They're predominantly white police officers, detectives and social workers who have no inroads into these Muslim communities, who do not engage with them. Hello, immigration, we reap what we sow. Lots in that, lots more to debate between now and 12 o'clock. 0344 499 1000. We'll be back in
I didn't actually create it. My officers created it and the engineers created it.
Right.
And obviously the idea comes from overseas, Holland, where you know there's a culture of walking and cycling. And in England and locally, we need to actually make sure we handle growth sustainably. There's lots of houses being built in the country. 11,000 in Hemel Hempstead planned in the next 5 or so years, 5,000 jobs. And if we rely on the car for everyone to get there, Hemel Hempstead will be an absolute gridlock.
We need to get tough on deporting people who come to our country and then break the law. We need to get really tough, like other sensible countries do. And if the law doesn't allow us to do that, then let's change the law. And if international laws don't allow us to do that, then let's derogate.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, there's trouble at Mill for Reform UK because 12 Reform UK councillors have announced they're going to resign in protest against Nigel Farage. They've branded the party leader of Reform UK disloyal and autocratic. The resignations could add to pressure on him. Of course, we've had Elon Musk saying that Nigel Farage isn't up to the job. He says that Rupert Lowe, who's one of the MPs for Reform UK, should take over. There are certainly problems for Nigel Farage in a number of directions, but in other directions you can say, well, yeah, he's got over 150,000 members of Reform UK, he's got 5 MPs, and in the local elections things are looking good for them, certainly in terms of the polls. There is one poll recently that put Reform as the most popular political party in this country. The councillors that are involved with this say they'll jump ship. They hold 2 district council seats, 9 town council seats and 5 parish council seats. All are from Derbyshire and include a guy called Alex Stevenson. He came second in Amber Valley, beautiful part of the world in Derbyshire, actually, Amber Valley. During the general election, he got 28% of the vote. They said they could not continue in good conscience under Nigel Farage's leadership. On the debate desk, Maxwell, Marlowe and Joe Wheeler are still with me. Maxwell, what do you make of this?
Let's look into some of these councillors who are looking to resign. I have spoken to the Reform team. I've asked them, you know, what is going on here? This seems very concerning.
You've done some research.
I've done some research. I know.
It's not just an opinion off the top of your head.
Definitely not.
What?
Unfortunately not. No. I've looked into it. So Reform tell me that some of these councillors are suspended because they were forging DNO certificates. Allegedly forging DNO certificates. And after the last election, where we saw a real crisis for Reform, where some of their candidates weren't as well vetted as they would have liked, they've tried to step it up. So Reform have told me that you know, some of these guys are allegedly forging certificates, and they'll probably be suspended.
Well, what are DNO certificates?
So they essentially like background checks, right? So if some councillors or candidates have failed the background check, allegedly, some of the gentlemen were forging the certificates to say yes, they can go forward. Okay. So that's what Reform has said.
Anytime you see anybody resigning from a political job, there's always something else. These are just allegations. We're not saying anybody's done anything.
Exactly.
We're simply saying that the
national laws don't allow us to do that. Then let's derogate.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, there's trouble at Mill for Reform UK because 12 Reform UK councillors have announced they're going to resign in protest against Nigel Farage. They've branded the party leader of Reform UK disloyal and autocratic. The resignations could add to pressure on him. Of course, we've had Elon Musk saying that Nigel Farage isn't up to the job. He says that Rupert Lowe, who's one of the MPs for Reform UK, should take over. There are certainly problems for Nigel Farage in a number of directions, but in other directions you can say, well, yeah, he's got over 150,000 members of Reform UK, he's got 5 MPs, and in the local elections things are looking good for them, certainly in terms of the polls. There is one poll recently that put Reform as the most popular political party in this country. The councillors that are involved with this say they'll jump ship. They hold 2 district council seats, 9 town council seats and 5 parish council seats. All are from Derbyshire and include a guy called Alex Stevenson. He came second in Amber Valley, beautiful part of the world in Derbyshire, actually, Amber Valley. During the general election, he got 28% of the vote. They said they could not continue in good conscience under Nigel Farage's leadership. On the debate desk, Maxwell, Marlowe and Joe Wheeler are still with me. Maxwell, what do you make of this?
Let's look into some of these councillors who are looking to resign. I have spoken to the Reform team. I've asked them, what is going on here? This seems very concerning.
You've done some research.
I've done some research. I know.
It's not just an opinion off the top of your head.
Definitely not.
What?
Unfortunately not. No. I've looked into it. So Reform tell me that some of these councillors are suspended because they were forging DNO certificates. Allegedly forging DNO certificates. And after the last election, where we saw a real crisis for Reform, where some of their candidates weren't as well vetted as they would have liked, they've tried to step it up. So Reform have told me that some of these guys are allegedly forging certificates, and they'll probably be suspended.
What are DNO certificates?
So they essentially like background checks, right? So if some councillors or candidates have failed the background check, allegedly, some of the gentlemen were forging the certificates to say yes, they can go forward. Okay. So that's what Reform has said.
Any time you see anybody resigning from a political job, there's always something else. Now, these are just allegations. We're not saying anybody's done anything.
Exactly.
We're simply saying that there's always more to it, isn't there, Joe?
Agreed. I'm glad that Maxwell did the research. That's helped both of us out this morning, because I looked at this and I thought this has the feeling of an ambush to it. I mean, Reform is a relatively new party. It's going great guns. Its membership has increased, hugely, and it's doing very well in the polls. Of course, Richard Tice stood aside for Nigel, and Nigel Farage is a magnificent personality as far as I'm concerned. Whether you like him or whether you loathe him, I don't think...
He communicates like very few others. He connects. He connects with people.
He does. And when this criticism came from Musk, again, I was quite shocked. Well, not just what are you doing in UK politics, but why are you having a pop at Nigel Farage?
He has a right to have an opinion, though, doesn't he?
Of course he does. I totally agree. It was just rather interesting. I mean, obviously, they've got a lot going on in the States at the moment, aren't they? Busy? Is there not the 20th coming up? Are there something going on that day?
It's interesting, just on a lot of our viewers and listeners are Reform UK supporters, and it's interesting that Ben Habib, the former joint deputy leader, they seem to be supporters of his. They said he was unceremoniously dumped. They say that Ben Habib truly represents the vision and values that drew us to Reform UK. I mean, whatever the truth of this, whatever the ins and outs, and there's always some sort of Byzantine kind of reasons for these things, the fact is that, factually, Nigel Farage is someone who annoys a lot of people. I mean, you look at his time in UKIP, you look at his time in the Brexit Party, quite a number of people resigned, left under his leadership. The evidence is there to suggest that historically he's not someone who can hold an organisation together. Could there be trouble ahead here, Joe?
I'm not sure whether there's trouble ahead. I mean, losing Ben Habib was awful, and I think I was listening to your programme the other day. Some lady called saying, I've been desperate to get hold of you, come back. And he said, I'm not entirely sure whether Central Office would like that. But of course, Nigel Farage, he was out in the States with Donald Trump, with the successes there. And the fact that Habib has gone, and now 12 councillors have gone, does cause people to turn around and say, hang on a second, what's happening with Reform? As I say, very popular. Yeah. I think their politics supersede either Labour or Conservative at the moment, because the country is looking for something else. When we were talking about the gangs earlier, is Reform promising to do something about that? And if they did, will they deliver? Because nobody else has done. This has gone on for a long time. We've had no answers. We've talked about the energy crisis. It's all obfuscation and net zero and no real plans what to do when we are all sitting shivering in our houses. Can Reform deliver? If they can, will they? And
in a sense, actually, do these rows about a few councillors actually matter if Reform UK is, it's clearly going great guns in the polls? We'll see what happens in the local elections. A number of local authorities councils basically have to decide whether they're moving into a different model and whether certain elections will happen and so on. But there will be elections in May, and all the evidence we have, Maxwell, is that Reform will do very well.
Yeah, well, the elections that are going ahead, of course, have been cancelled. On the Ben Habib question, I think just to, think about this a little bit more in detail, is that Ben Habib didn't win his seat, and it's quite hard to have, a deputy leader who isn't sitting in the House alongside Rupert or Lee or James, I just think that's a little bit concerning, to be honest, because, yes, Ben, left and it wasn't under the best circumstances, but I can kind of see why he was kicked out, because if he didn't win his seat, it's really hard to then come back in.
I can see why they perhaps removed him as deputy leader, but the way it seems to have been done, like, we're getting into the weeds now of how things are. But, speaking of excellent communicators, Ben Habib is one of those people who communicates really, really well, and I think there are very few, actually, who communicate as well as he does.
I think the reform team are upset that it's gone the way it has. He, as your listeners know, as you know, he was very much loved and is very much loved, and that's why we keep going back to him, Ben. Okay. So I think this is a bump in the road. I don't think it's going to stop them from achieving what is likely to be a large amount of success in the coming elections.
Well, we will see what happens with Reform UK. Thank you both very much indeed, Maxwell, Marlowe and Joe Wheeler, political commentators both. Joe, of course, is a meteorologist as well, keeping us up to date with what's going on. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including Kelvin in Macclesfield, who says, "Morning, Peter. The government wants foreigners to stop interfering in our politics, but don't want foreigners to stop interfering with our children." Very, very interesting thought on that. Matt in Manchester says, "I'm sick of the smoke and mirrors about inquiries. I want police investigations and then immediate prosecutions," in the words of Matt. And Shane says, "I'm tired of politicians and the wider media and commentators using scare tactics such as streeting, saying all of this is going to incite violence to shut down debate rather than tackling the real issues," says Shane. Trudy says, "I don't think we need an inquiry into the acts of gangs, but it is essential."
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. Peter Cardwell here. I hope you've been with us for the last hour, because we've had a really spirited discussion about all sorts of things, including those paedophile gangs, what we should do about them, and Reform UK as well. We talked about that. We talked about